New Thought Media Network and the Universal Joy Center are proud to bring you The Joy Show. One voice, one story, infinite inspiration. Join your host, Barbara Jean, every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time or 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Tune in live or watch anytime on youtube.com/@UJOYC. The Joy Show with Barbara Jean. The perfect way to get inspired on Friday afternoons. Only on New Thought Media Network. And please like, share, and subscribe. And now, let's join Barbara Jean on The Joy Show.
Good afternoon and welcome to The Joy Show. Joy being an acronym for just one you. And so I bring on these remarkable guests to share their stories so we can be inspired by all of the wonderful things they've accomplished that might help us to find some ways of accomplishing our good stuff. Anyway, delighted to be here with you today. So let us begin with the land acknowledgement. And as we gather today, we acknowledge that we are standing on the historical land. I am standing on the historical land of the Wendat people and more recently that of the Mississaugas and the Haudenosaunee nations. And it's now home to many diverse First Nation, Mattis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island. May we walk alongside our Indigenous family, recognizing our shared stewardship of the earth. Let us carry forward the spirit of unity, understanding, and resilience that we've been reminded of through our reflections. And let us hold in our hearts the intention to learn, to support, and to advocate for justice and sovereignty for us all. In doing so, we acknowledge our interconnectedness and the strength that comes from standing together in truth, respect, and love. And may this intention guide us in our actions and thoughts, inspiring us to contribute to a world where the dignity and rights of all are honored. And by making this acknowledgement, we strive to be allies and take an active part in reconciliation. We honor the land, the history, and the unique heritage and culture of the Indigenous people. And this fosters our commitment to create a world that works for the highest and best good of all life. How's that? Miigwech. Well, my guest today is a powerful, positive, productive, brilliant, creative woman by the name of Julia Mattis, and she has spent the past 40 years as an entrepreneur. Yes, she looks like she's 30, but somehow she's done 40 years as an entrepreneur, working across several industries and building a wide range of experience in both business and nonprofit leadership. Over the years, she's run a successful events and catering company, and a hotel management company, and a real estate company. She's been busy. She has also developed an extensive background in sales, marketing, branding, coaching, and training. I'll tell you, this girl is full of spice. Throughout her career, Julia has focused on building relationships, supporting growth, and helping others move forward with clarity and confidence. Welcome, Julia.
Hey.
Hey. Wow, you sound brilliant.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if it's brilliant or just busy. Coming back to your point, I think it's just busy.
a little bit of both. You've been
a little
really
bit of both.
Yeah. So now you're on this spiritual journey. You're a licensed practitioner in the science of mind, and you're also the the brilliant marketing person helping many of us out. You do a lot of things, but how did you start on that spiritual path? What brought that on?
Wow. Well, that's kind of a long story. I grew up with parents who married out of their religions. Is basically the short version of it. My grandmothers were my role models growing up. And my father's people grew up in a very poor part of Pennsylvania and were Roman Catholics. And it was the kind of Catholicism that up until I was a teenager, the Mass was still in Latin. So that's how traditional the upbringing was on that side. And then my other grandmother, my mother's people, were from upstate New York, and my grandmother was a very involved in the Northern Baptist Catholic churches. Yeah. And in particular, at a time when the world was very divided, believe it or not, much more than it is now. Back in the 60s, going to church in Rochester, New York was an experience for me because I had this very white Pennsylvania upbringing, Catholicism. And then my other grandmother, when I walked into her church, it was like going into the United Nations. And in her house, I had that same experience. She had Bible study in her house, and blacks and whites and Chinese and everyone. It was as though there was no separation. My grandmother didn't see rich or poor or black or white. Just everyone was welcome at her home. And so I grew up, and it's funny because I say this out loud now, but I actually thought that my grandmothers prayed to two different gods. They were different churches, they were different books, they were different languaging, everything. So I was very influenced. I now understand, and I was a seeker my whole life because my grandmothers had this faith, this unshakable faith in their religions. But as a child, because I adored both of my grandmothers, I didn't want to choose the wrong God. I didn't want to choose the wrong grandmother. I didn't want to upset anybody. And so fast forward, I was always a seeker. I studied Judaism for a while. I even in college got involved with Young Life. So I was always seeking. And then fast forward, I got married and my mother-in-law moved in with us, and she too was very devout. But I had long since moved away from any kind of religiosity because I was involved in politics, because I was involved in business. It just wasn't something that you did, right? You didn't talk about God or church or anything like that. So so I started taking her to church. And this goes back when I was in my 50s, and it rekindled something in me. It rekindled a large part of who I was when I was growing up. And I didn't want to offend her either, so I waited till she passed away. And a lot of my more entrepreneurial, self-employed business friends had actually been going to Columbia Center for Spiritual Living. And I knew it was time for me to find something on my own. And, it's the classic story. I walked in, and at that time, the congregational song was Holy, Holy Way.
Yes.
And I knew I had found my people. And so that was 12 years ago. So let's see, 12 years ago. And I have been a devoted practitioner since that happened.
That's fantastic. It's interesting to hear the stories of getting there. Like, I was raised without religion. And so I was in my late 20s when I started exploring. So tell me a little bit about, like, you've had this vast career experience. You've done catering, you've done hotel management, you're doing real estate, you're helping out nonprofits. So what was each one of those things like? What attracted you to all those different things? Because some of them are quite different.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. Even as you say that, in my mind, I see them all as being very similar.
Okay.
And I'll tell you. So for me, my parents, I never got allowance, and I grew up in South Jersey in a very rich town. And I started working at a very early age because I wanted to have the kinds of things my friends had, and to be able to do the kinds of things that and my parents didn't have that in their upbringing. So I started working when I was almost 9 years old or 10 years old. I would do things like babysit. I had a couple of newspaper routes. I would clean out people's garages and attics. Like, I was always hustling. It's about the best way I can explain it. I was always hustling.
Yeah.
And my mom, when I was in middle school, my mom went back to work. She was a professor at the local college, university. And so, and she wasn't a traditional mom anyway, because she never cooked. She never did any of that stuff. Actually, my dad did that. And so in that sense, it was a bit non-traditional. But my brother and I got super tired of coming home from school and there not being any food or any dinner. So I started cooking. And as with everything else I do, I tend to go over the top on everything. So I, at a very young age, made a deal with some of the local churches, and I said, hey, I can do this. And I would start doing like little, it was a small town in New Jersey, so everybody knew each other. My high school class was only 220. So I would do things like teas, and I would do parties and little afternoon events, and then that kind of parlayed itself into some bigger things, some smaller weddings, garden weddings, that type of thing. And so I was always kind of imagining solutions. And so I negotiated with the local church for them to let me use their kitchen, and I would do a couple church events kind of for free. They would buy the food, but I would provide the service. So that was kind of my beginnings. In fact, my mother just found one of my original business cards that I had when I was in high school. Creative Cuisine was the name of my company. And I know, it's really kind of funny that she saved my business card. And then, so I grew up in a small town that was located near Atlantic City and kind of all up and down the entertainment strip of South Jersey. So I was going to college. I came back from Europe, and I wasn't learning in school what I wanted to learn to run a business. And my parents said, well, go to work. So I went to work at a local restaurant at the back end. So you'll see that it's a very logical transition that I made through these different businesses. So I moved into the back end of the kitchen, and then accidentally one day the place burned down. And that's a whole nother conversation. But that's in South Jersey, that's how they clear buildings when they want to put in a shopping center. All of a sudden you come to work one day and do the math. So all of a sudden I'm out of the job, and it was the Sheraton Post Inn. And so then I took a job down here at the Sheraton in Washington, and kind of the natural progression. It was a big shock to my system, because going from this little neighborhood hotel, it really wasn't, but it was kind of to this, hotel with 1,000 rooms almost, and entertainment centers and 5 restaurants and blah, blah, blah. It was really kind of an interesting transition for me. So that's kind of how I navigated them. And I was always looking for an angle for myself to be able to build a business, because being this, excuse my French, being the smart ass that I was, I always thought that I could do things better. And so that's what I would do. I would learn mentoring, and I teach this, and I actually advocate this in ministerial school. I created a mentoring program in the ministerial school, because to me, mentoring has always been my life hack. It's how I learned everything. I would cozy up to some of the best chefs in the world. Chef Marco Dijon came to the Sheraton, and he at that time he was famous for Cajun duck is what he brought to DC. And so I was always the one who, when the lights went off and everybody punched out at the end of the day, I was the one who stayed. I was the one who learned. I was the one who hung around. I was always hungry for knowledge, for learning. And so then I would just build my businesses myself from that knowledge. So that's kind of how things progressed. And the hotel business, essentially I was kicked out of the hotel business. People don't know this, but back in the late 80s, we actually had our first banking meltdown, the Texas S&L's collapse. And the hotel company that I was working for, that we ran, actually we had a number of hotels and restaurants. By then my husband and I were doing it together, the management company. We had to file for bankruptcy, because all of the lines of credit for all of these large companies dried up, literally overnight with that first S&L meltdown. So then I moved into real estate. That was, again, a natural and sequential sort of just sliding over into a new industry. And again, learned that very quickly. And then we started our own real estate company. So and this was when computers and the internet and the MLS and things were changing in a significant way. Today we take it for granted, for example, that the MLS and everything is online, but back in the 80s it wasn't. There was no internet. Yeah, we had books, houses were listed in books and clients came in and you thumbed through books together. And it was a very different world. And so we took advantage of that sudden growth, potential growth. I have always been very good about seeing trends before they hit. And I think that's because when you are an entrepreneur, you always try to stay up. It's nothing. It's nothing special. It's just about keeping your finger on the pulse of change and things that are happening, unfolding, and knowing how to insert yourself in that. So when I first started in the real estate business, for example, it was very unusual for real estate agents to sell outside of their own neighborhood. But by then, buyer agency had just come into Maryland. So we saw the potential, because up until that point, buyers were never represented. We forget that back in the old days, up until the early 90s, agents always and only represented their sellers.
Yeah.
So this concept of being a buyer's agent was very new and very radical. And we kind of took that and made it almost like a buyer agency company, which again at that time was sort of unheard of. Now fast forward, it's the way business is done. So that was, again, to me, it's actually very logical. The branding and the branding company basically came about because, again, as realtors, initially all we did was represented our broker. Then there was this transition in the late 90s into the early 2000s where agents were branding themselves as themselves.
Yeah.
So then it was shifting, and not only just taking that to my agents, but then also taking it out into my network then, and teaching my friends who were solo entrepreneurs or solo business women at the time. My friend and I primarily worked with women because at that time women were coming into the entrepreneurial world and they hadn't been. Again, you and I have seen a lot of changes in how business is done. So we helped women find their voice by helping them brand themselves, and we were teaching people how to brand themselves way before it was even a buzzword. And it was really just kind of out of this real heartfelt observation that women didn't know how to voice themselves. They didn't know how to speak their truth. They didn't know how to walk into a room of men and tell people what they did without being intimidated. So it was this whole mindful ability, and that's kind of what I'm doing for churches now, is kind of coming full circle. And churches and centers have the spirituality piece down, but COVID changed everything. Yes. And we now have to run our businesses and our centers and our churches as though they are businesses, and not assuming that the minister or the boards know how to do that, because they don't, nor should they. However, they will be required to if they can't hire people who can do it for them. So that's kind of the what I enjoy doing now is donor development, donor cultivation, fundraising, marketing, teaching people. I don't want to do it for you. I want to teach you how to do it for yourself.
That's perfect.
So that's kind of, you can see sort of the arc of the evolution of.
And it makes perfect sense as you look at it that way. It does make absolutely perfect sense. I mean, I think back to mine, I started off, I think I worked for the first time when I was about 16, other than babysitting. I'd done babysitting before that. But, my first job was when I was 16. That didn't last very long, in a drugstore. And then, I don't know, a couple of years later, after I got divorced, I went and worked in another drugstore, stayed there for a couple of years, and then ended up working for a newspaper in Calgary, the main daily paper, the Calgary Herald. And I worked there for 10 years. And part of what we did there was launch a weekly newspaper called Neighbors. And it was done right across the country, the Southern chain. All of the big dailies launched one of these, and Calgary was the only success story. And we brought in $1 million of increased revenue and a few hundred new accounts. And so we won the President's Award for Southern Ink at the time, which was, I made it on the cover, in the centerfold, for a business.
Quick! You gotta be quicker than that. Actually, the dangling participle is I was the centerfold is actually quite brilliant. You should lead with that, actually. That was the centerfold. You don't have to tell them where.
Fully dressed and sitting on a pile of newspapers. But, it's interesting. And then I went into real estate. I did real estate for 8 years, and I did real estate while I studied my ministry because it worked well. I had flexible hours. I could do all the classes, attend services, do all of these things. So we have some similarities in our path. I'm not as entrepreneurial as you are, although I'm working on it. And I think I'm there. I'm doing lots of good stuff. But the journey of getting there, right? Believing in ourselves. You mentioned women and how, they just didn't know how to do some of these things. And I think it wasn't so much they didn't know how, they'd been convinced by someone somewhere that they weren't capable. And you're helping to change that because, frankly, we are very capable.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I don't. Yeah, yes, you're absolutely right. I think it's multidimensional. I think it was a combination of things. It was a combination of fear, a combination of so many women married to have, to be taken care of. I mean, I had a whole slew of friends when I was in my 40s who were suddenly single. They were divorced for various reasons. So it was absolutely multidimensional in the reasons. But I think the out picturing or the demonstration was all the same. And that it was just, so it was just a matter of kind of helping them to break their own glass ceilings, their own sense of limitation, and giving them the tools that they had been afraid to ask for. If there was a common theme, they were afraid to ask because they were used to being the provider, being used to being the taking care of her, right? The supporter, and not being used to ask for what they wanted or what they needed. So I think it was also more of teaching that, and also the whole branding idea. Again, women were not used to showing up as themselves, being women of business and being taken seriously. And in this area anyway, some of them turned out to have some of the most amazing, powerful companies at the end of the day.
I think, when I was in Kenya, where women really don't have rights yet, it was interesting to see the businesses that women had started, like the taxi company that picked us up at the airport and drove us. Now, the men were driving the taxi, and one of the ministers had said to them at one point, "How do you feel working for a woman?" And they went, "Oh, we don't work for her. We work with her. We're partners." And I thought, how smart is that? Because otherwise the men would be like underlings, which wouldn't go well with their buddies or whatever, right? And here she made them partners. And we went into 3 different companies that women had founded. One of them, they were recycling and reusing flip-flops, little plastic flip-flops, right? Turning them into furniture, turning them into wonderful little creations, doing all kinds of cool stuff with them. And a woman had started that. So they're clearing up the ocean by getting people to find these old flip-flops and bring them to them. They pay them for that. And then they clean them all up, take them apart, and repurpose them. So it's like, and then the other one was they were making beads and stuff like that by hand. These little tiny beads, each one hand painted. And I'm thinking, holy man, that's a lot of work. But all these women there, and then partway through, they took a break and they're dancing. They're dancing and singing and going around. That's their little break, and then back to their tables. And what I loved about it was the idea of the women stepping up to really create something meaningful and to do it in a way that can be supported by the country as well, which can sometimes be a little bit, where you have to kind of work with that a bit. Have you ever run into the male dominant, trying to control what you do?
Have I? So, yes. And it was regional. I have found in the South in particular, when I had a telecommunications company and I would drive, especially when I was in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, meeting with hotel owners. And some of it was cultural too, because many of the hotel chains, and especially in the Southeast, were owned by East Indians. The other part was just Southern men. And I'll never forget, I was down in, right outside of Raleigh. It was on the east side. I had a meeting with the owner of a hotel and some of his leadership team. And when I was standing there next to him, I remember him turning to me and saying, "Honey, can you get me a cup of coffee?"
Ouch.
Yeah. And it was interesting because he was one of the hotels that I never was able to lock into a contract, but boy, he sure loved having me come around.
Well, he needed that coffee.
Well, he needed that coffee, among other things. And that's really what it was. They were not used to having women come in these kinds of roles, and so his job was to try to make me submissive. His job was to try to, and maybe it wasn't even, I'm sure it wasn't conscious.
No, I'm sure it wasn't.
But it's just something that I needed to be aware of, and I needed to, back then in those days, it was not typical for a woman to be traveling from city to city and town to town by herself in a car. I started driving a Bronco, a big pickup truck, because I was coming on to sometimes construction sites and dealing with companies that were still kind of in the early stages of, let's say, building a hotel or whatever. And so I thought, if I'm going to run with the big boys, I got to drive what the big boys drive. And I have driven SUVs ever since that, because I wasn't going to let a man intimidate me. I remember pulling up in my red Thunderbird and having some guy make some smack-ass comment to me about, not wanting to get dirt on my car or something like that. And I thought, son of a gun. So it was always kind of trying, and that's kind of what I've always done, is figuring out, like, how do I make sure a thing is not a thing? Like, how do I make sure that that's something that I'm not, getting in and out of that Thunderbird, I'm sure it was quite a show. And just making sure that I'm not, that wasn't ever going to be a thing for me. And so that was a deliberate intention to get rid of the Thunderbird and to get a truck and to be, hey, I'm going to pull my truck up next to your truck and we're going to have a conversation. And that's always been about that kind of adaptation. I never hung in and I guess that's just how my brain works. I've never hung in the, oh my God, that guy just insulted me. I never hung in that. I always made sure that I took it in, I assessed it, and I said, okay, how can I do this better the next time? And that has always been a thing for me, is never to take that kind of thing personally, and just to figure out what happens now. How do I move past this? How do I make sure I take this isn't, like I said, this isn't a thing the next time. So, whenever I went to meet with him, I made sure it was always at the other end of the table, or we were not, there were just some I think some adaptive behaviors that I just learned fairly quickly, so that these things wouldn't be an issue.
Oh, I love that. I love that, because I think that still can be a challenge today, even here in Canada, that, there's this idea that somehow men are superior. And I think that has been something that we've allowed to continue, because I think we're ready to flip that switch to realize that we're equals. There is no up and down. But on that note, we're going to take a short little commercial break. We're at our halfway point of our show. And don't go away, because the Joy Show is going to be right back with more of Julia's brilliance. Don't you just love it? We're on the New Thought Media Network. Don't go away.
What I love about Anson is the community, the people. I get to come here every year and pick up right where I left off with so many wonderful soul-centered friends.
This is our first time here, and I can't tell you the joy I've felt. listening to the wonderful words of the people who are teaching us and sharing with us.
I've enjoyed every topic that's been talked about, and I've enjoyed the people. They're knowledgeable, they're loving, and it's a great space to spend a few days for yourself and for others.
You feel the love. It is literally palpable.
Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. Jerry Troyer, Board President of the affiliated New Thought Network, Anson, speaking to you live and direct from Unity Village outside of Kansas City. We are a beloved spiritual community, and we'd love to have you join us.
So if you're thinking about it and you'd like to have a deep dive into your own soul and connect with others that are doing the same thing, then you might want to consider coming to the Anson Retreat next year in 2025 here at Unity Village. Peace and blessings to you.
And we're back. So I'm here with my wonderful guest, Julia Mattis. I'm Barbara Jean, the host. I don't even think I said that at the beginning of the show. Oh, dear. Oh, there's that human thing happening.
They all know who you are.
Oh, they all know who I am. I don't need to introduce myself. Anyway, we got talking a little bit about navigating the world as women and navigating the business world specifically, because sometimes there's still some men out there who kind of think they know more or can do it better, or they're just not aware that things have changed or are changing.
Yes, and I've run into my fair share of women lately too.
Yes.
And I will share that as well. So it's almost like it's an equal opportunity experience, because I think, and I will be honest, I probably have been that way myself too, up until, I wouldn't say now, but I would say I know that I experienced that, because you're so used to being in overdrive, you're so used to being in full throttle defense mode, that sometimes when a woman comes along who challenges you, I know I had this experience at least once, there is this tendency that I think that we have, at least I do, because I know I push myself hard, to actually push other women harder than they would actually push themselves. And I'm sure that could be perceived as bitch mode, right? I'm sure that has its own negatives, but I guess it's and it was a very difficult mental construct to undo, to be honest with you. you know, you kind of get to this point where you're like, I deserve this, right? Like, I've worked hard for this, and I'm going to crush somebody's soul just like my soul was crushed. There's a little bit of that. I won't say that that was something that I worked very hard, but I have met my fair share, to be honest with you. So I can't even say anymore that it's just men, to be honest with you.
Well, I think that, you know, part of it, I mean, is that we as women have fought each other almost to the same degree that men might be resisting us in a little different way. Women are resisting us kind of louder and bigger by, you know, kind of pushing against some of the things that we're doing because they're not comfortable with it. That they've got an idea of what life should be or could be, and we're not living to that standard.
Well said, Barbara Jean, well said.
Yeah. So I think as women, we need to learn, number one, to love ourselves. Got to start here. If I don't love me, then I don't got love to give. And what I'm finding is that as I love myself and really come to a place of acceptance of who I am and where I am and what's going on at the moment, that I find I'm more loving out here. And so I think there has to be a way that we learn to accept ourselves just where we are.
Well, and I think therein lies the rub, right? Because we're not, even when I would go to these seminars, and that was part of the reason, part of my experience was to go to some of these trainings and to realize they were teaching us to be men and to behave like men, right? Right? They were teaching us how to network. And it wasn't until a friend of mine, Ginny Robertson, started a group 20 years ago. I was one of her first members, called On Purpose Networking for Women. And it was the first time a woman who came out of the business world said, I'm tired of networking like a guy. We need to, we do it differently. And she's built a very, very big global company on this idea of women networking with each other. And it's also learning to take that newfound sense of self out with us and not hide it. And that was the biggest transition for me was, you know, you say love yourself. I mean, Barbara Jean, I have to tell you, until I came into this teaching and almost got into ministerial school, I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
At 60 years old, I had no idea what self-love meant. I thought it was selfish, which is why I always shied away from it.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Nobody bothered. And maybe it's because it's actually a very misunderstood concept unless you go into the New Age or the spiritual realm. And, you know, part of what I thought I might do when I became a minister initially was to take some of these concepts out into the world. Out, right? As if there is an inner and out. But the world does treat it that way. And it's a challenge because I did bring, you know, in my last, after I left my companies and closed my companies, I did move into another company where I was helping some friend of mine, and I did bring the science of mind and some of the New Thought teachings into that world. But people are very much where I was when I was in my 20s and 30s, which is they have no concept of what even love is. You know, we've gotten into this world now where relationships are very transactional. And this understanding of what constitutes love is very misunderstood. So, you know, trying to talk to people about love of others or even just love of self, I mean, it has I've had a very interesting experience. And I see myself in that place 20 or 30 years ago where I would have been, you know, don't have time for that. Don't have time for that. You know, self-care, like I literally had no idea what self-care was. Self-compassion, I had no idea. I could have compassion for others. I had lots of compassion for others, but I had none for myself. And so there's this real learning curve that I've been on these past 4 or 5 years as I have, as I said, disassembled all these mental constructs to open myself up to that, to those concepts and to try to embody them.
It is a new concept, and I think there's been a couple of people who've written about it and done, you know, kind of a really good job of talking about what self-love is. And part of it is the honoring the path that we say we want to walk. We'll get an idea to do something, and then we might turn around and go, well, you know, well, maybe it's not such a good idea, or maybe I can't do it, or right, like we'll start to put walls up once we have these great ideas, or we'll share them too quickly, and then people around will kind of go, yeah, I know you can't do that. I think sometimes we forget the power that we possess and our ability to bring it forward in a loving, supportive, compassionate way that assists others in being the best that they can be as well. But it really is about being the best you. And if you can be the best you, you now have energy to share. It's when we're really struggling that we don't have anything to share. If our basic needs aren't met, then I've got nothing for you, right? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, in theory, because I'll tell you, I read all those damn books. And that was so for me, I was so in my left brain. I could probably, I mean, one of the first books I read 35 years ago was Leah Buscaglia. Yeah, right. Leo, remember Leo? I mean, he was amazing. And then I got into a lot of Wayne Dyer, and I followed Wayne Dyer. My challenge with it was, Barbara Jean, is that I couldn't make the transition from here to here.
Here to here.
I knew it. I had it memorized. I had all of those books. Yeah. And so the other thing is, I mean, when you're running several companies and you're on several boards, and someone says to you, because this is what I'm going through right now, you need to take some time. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have time. Have you seen my calendar? Where do you see it's going to fit in here? You know what I mean? And it was kind of like this tragic kind of like self-justification about I didn't have time to do me. I didn't get the connection. And it's one of the reasons why actually, and I know you and I talked about this, it's one of the reasons why I'm not going to take my capstones till next year, is because I really don't want to get into the birth canal of the whole ministry thing. I really feel like I want to take the time right now to sit in the cooker, right? To sit and really, because that's been the whole transition for me, is that we don't give ourselves time. We go on, and I used to do this. You go on these retreats. You check in on Friday. You get your name bag. You sit in meditation Saturday morning. You feel good. You feel great. You go get uplifted. You go home Monday, and everything goes back to the way it was.
Exactly.
Right. And so yeah. And so this is really this has been a real big shift for me in terms of understanding that it's the embodiment. It's the, right, taking the deep breath and really letting myself feel. I had forgotten how to feel. I didn't know how to feel.
That's true of many people. I've sometimes printed out a list of feelings, which is quite extensive, and given it to people. And it's like they look at it and go, well, I thought it was like happy, sad, and mad were kind of that might be the main thing, but that is not what's going on. And if you can name a feeling, sometimes it's easier to deal with it.
But for me, I tell you, my biggest aha moment was when I discovered that love is not just, that love has all these nuances to it. Like, I literally had no clue. Like, you could love a friend, you can love a mentor, and you can have all these different iterations of love. I had no idea.
Yeah, because I think when we think of love, we think of romance.
Exactly.
And that's not what it is. When I'm talking about love, I'm talking about the God stuff. So it's like, if this is a temple of the divine, then I should be taking really good care of it. But how many of us don't? And I'm guilty, right? It's like you eat the wrong food, or you go, oh, I don't feel like walking today, I'm tired. Like all of these excuses. And those excuses are the very thing that put us in the middle of a difficulty, because basically we're treating ourselves badly and expecting the world to treat us really well. But again, we always tend to bring into our experience much of what we're doing. So if I'm treating myself badly, if I'm disappointing myself on the regular, I'm probably going to find some of that in the world around me as well. And if I see it, I can heal it if I acknowledge it. If it's one of those things that you see and you feel that you could deal with. But what got you to think about becoming a minister?
Well, it's interesting. I had an experience as a child when I was 7 years old. This gentleman that I spoke to you about, that was in my mother's church, Lake Avenue Baptist Church. I will never forget him. He made such an impression on me at such a young age. In my mind, he was probably about 7 feet tall, thin, older man. And he was the minister there. And there was something about him that was so divinely. My experience of him was palpable. In fact, I can duplicate it by just thinking about him. And one of the things I'll never forget about him was, coming down the aisles after church was over, and folding his tall frame and coming down to my level and saying hello and giving me a hug. Or, I'll never forget, there was an elderly black woman who came to church in a wheelchair with her daughter. Him just kind of folding his frame down and coming down to her level, and the compassion and the love and the amazing ways that this man taught would just touched me. And it called me at a very early age, and I know a lot of my colleagues in ministerial school say the same thing. We get this call very early in life, and then we put it away. And that's what I did. And the complication was, as I explained to you in the earlier part of the show, that I really thought there were two gods. It wasn't until I got into foundations class that I really excavated that false belief that I really thought there were two gods.
Yeah.
And I had no reason to believe otherwise. They lived in different houses. They drove different cars. They had different books. They had different hymns. I mean, literally everything about my experience of worship with both of my different grandmothers was not just a little different, but hugely and vastly different.
Yeah.
And I was so touched by him that I really wanted to be a minister. He
cool.
touched me in a way. My experience of him through my early years and up through my teen years was such that he moved me. And I wanted that experience, and I was so called to that, and I realized that was part of my search as well. So fast forward, when I discovered Science of Mind and Centers for Spiritual Living, it was a natural and logical part of my life to say, why not now? If not now, when? Right? Like, hello.
Yes. If not now, when?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
That's a good question.
Well, and I had an experience with my minister, which I know you know the story of, where I learned the power of the teachings, because he taught us principle. He taught us the principles of Science of Mind and Ernest Holmes, and that was the spark. That was the connection that was made, right? The arc of that experience as a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old to now a 57-year-old or a 56-year-old. And how that gap closed, right? And how that gap closed. And so, how could I not? Like, literally, how could I not?
That's what's fascinating. My journey's similar. After having a spiritual epiphany, going, this is what I want to do forever, is let people understand the power of love, because that's what God is love. And where I was, women weren't allowed to do that. And I stayed there for a year and a half in the Nazarene church. And then I had to get out because they couldn't answer my questions. What do you mean the rabbi's going to hell? I couldn't buy that. What do you mean somebody who's never heard of Jesus Christ is going to hell? Like, I don't know about that. So I had questions that they couldn't answer logically or clearly or whatever. And so I was drifting very quickly. And a friend of mine said, well, you should check out the Center for Positive Living, which is what Calgary's center was called at the time. And I went there, and my experience and that first Sunday service was just this warmth in that space. It felt like love. It felt like the experience I had when I first embodied the grace of God in me. It was like I walked into that room and it was like, wow, this is home. This is home. And I knew I had to be a minister. That wasn't even up for conversation. That was definitely my path. And I think sometimes we get inspiration to do something, but then we build walls that say, no, I could never do that. And we make excuses why we can't. But the truth is, we can do anything we set our mind to. And boy, have you proven that, because you've done everything.
I don't know if I've done everything, but everything I've tried, everything I've attempted, I guess that's the thing. I love learning. I just love learning. And it has been, and that has been the part I loved about ministerial school too. I've loved this learning. I've really loved it.
Oh, me too. Me too. Yeah. Some of the books we had to read that we never would have read. I know. Look at all your books, and I love that.
Do I look like a student or what?
No kidding. But that's the thing. You do need to have resources, and it is a lot of books and paper and typing and writing and everything else that you have to do to go into ministry. But ministry, for me anyway, I think it's a call. It's less about school and more about your heart space and because ministry is it's a surrendering into a life of service to the world. It's not just your congregation, it's to yourself, your family, everything around you, and finding a way to do that and contain a balance so that you can still look after you. Because I used to tell that story too. Oh, I just don't have time. Can't meditate. Don't have time to meditate. And my teacher would just laugh at me like, yeah, right. Okay. Whatever you say. And then I used to talk about how hard everything was until I changed that and said, what if it were easy? So I think we have a lot of work that we can do that's productive, and then there's some that we do that causes us hardship. So where are you going next? You've got your ministerial school that you're doing, which you will graduate, next year?
Yes, next June, yes.
Next June, okay. So then what?
I don't know. I think one of the things, again, that has been an important part of this process is I have been the driver and the creator of my life for so long, and it's been coming to this understanding that ministry is about being led from the inside. And it has been really it's been a huge struggle for me. I don't mind telling you. Sitting in this nothingness, for me, the nothingness, because I'm so clear, and I so clearly understand that this is not something that is I'm going to say this is not what I mean, but this is what comes up for me now. I can't decide what happens next.
That's right.
I can't decide. I have to allow myself to be guided. I have to allow and trust and know that the right and perfect thing is going to show up. And that has been my practice, is not to be the driver of this, not to be the, I'm going to go interview here, 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 and here. Have I been recruited? Yes. Is it flattering? Yes. Does it mean that I need to follow up on it? No. If it's not calling to me, and that's what I'm trying to learn, is to how to trust this.
Oh, I
that's
love
what this
that.
whole practice has been about, is learning to trust this and to actually say, thank you, but no. I really appreciate that. However, that doesn't feel right to me now. That doesn't feel like my calling. That doesn't feel like my place.
I love that.
Everyone says it's like falling in love, which, I'll have to go with that too, is you'll know. You'll just know.
You will know.
There it is again.
That knowing is pretty loud when it comes in. It's
And
yeah.
I never had that. Like, I've always been about creating the next thing in my life, and I think for me this is a real practice in not doing
Surrender.
that. Yes, that word. So I don't know. Like, I don't know. Call me next year. I mean, we can do this again next year, and I can tell you where I land, because that has really been for me. It's like a pregnant pause. It's
Yeah.
I mean, I'm loving what I'm doing. I love this work that I'm doing, the consulting that I'm doing, but I'm not that's not it either. That's for now. That is how I share my gifts.
Yep.
Right? That is how I share my gifts, because I love this teaching and I love this organization, and I love offering the gifts and talents that I have, and that's about where I'm going to leave it right now.
Beautiful. I love that. Well, we're down to our last 4 minutes. And I always like to ask, what is one thing you would like people to take away from the show today?
Wow, what is one thing I would like? That's got to be the hardest question you've asked me today. What is one thing? Don't be afraid.
Oh.
Don't be afraid. Don't listen. Don't listen to the outside too. I think that's the most important thing. For me, the biggest epiphany was when I signed up for ministerial school, and social media is kind of my jam. And all of my friends were posting pictures on Facebook of them retiring. And here I am moving into my next iteration. And it was a bit of a shock for me at first, because I forget how old I am, right? Yeah. Chronologically. And so for me, I mean, that's been the biggest demonstration for me, is having the courage to keep moving ahead despite what all the signs around me are saying.
I'm
and
in
to,
the same place. Yeah.
Trusting and knowing that when it is divinely inspired, there's nothing that can stop you. Don't be afraid.
And I've watched all my friends from high school and stuff retire, and I look at that and I go, oh, wouldn't that be nice? And then I think, no, I would hate that. What would I do?
And see, it's funny for me. I would not. To me, the thought of, oh, wouldn't that be nice? Like, literally never occurred to me. Literally never occurred to me. I just looked at it as more of a reflection of how old I was, of all of a sudden understanding this place that I've gotten to, and to know that I do have the freedom at this moment, and I'm going for it. I mean, it's just it's a feeling I can't even explain to you, but I think it's having those markers from the outside was kind of interesting, but it's really about don't be afraid, and that's something that the number of my colleagues and I talk about, because we're a lot of us in ministerial school are around the same age, and so it is about not having fear and not letting sort of people tell you what to do or how to do it.
It's true. It's so true. Julia, thank you so much for joining me today. You are truly an inspiration. You've accomplished so many things in your life, and here you are doing more still and again. And so congratulations. I know you're going to be a phenomenal minister. That is without a doubt. And I'm so grateful to know you.
Right back at you, sister. I love you too.
I love you so much. Well, everybody, this is the end of today's Joy Show. I want to thank you all for watching, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And you might even consider sending a donation either to New Thought Media Network or wherever you're inspired. Be sure to share. There is a reciprocal nature to life itself. Thank you for being here. Be sure to share with your friends. Julia, have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you. You too, my friend.
I love you all. Bye, everybody. Till next time.